correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. Today we have a very special guest, but before we do that, we want to talk about one of our favorite podcasts, Squad Tactica.
Yes, Squad Tactica, Sugi's, generically you could call it a Warhammer Kill Team podcast, but it's more about minis and painting and just having fun. And Sugi gets a lot of really, really cool people on there. I think he's had Duncan Rhodes on a time or two. He's had some other people whose names I don't recognize, but I can tell from the way people on the Discord react, they're big names in, the Warhammer and painting and whatever communities. And it's just a really cool, fun show, and their Discord's a really cool place to hang out. So we'll link all that in the show notes. But that's Squad Tactica for you.
Yeah, so today we have a guest on again.
Indeed we do. Another long-distance guest.
Yeah, all the way from New Zealand, we have Liam from Mud and Blood.
Kia ora te. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to join us. So for those of you who apparently have never listened to our show before and have never heard us mention this Mud and Blood podcast, well, that's not all Liam does, but maybe you'd like to take a minute and just explain what Mud and Blood is for everybody before we get into talking about kind of a Mud and Blood style of gaming this week.
Yeah, no worries. So Mud and Blood, the tagline is a podcast dark and grim, which is rather foreboding. We're just a sort of a very long form podcast that discusses specifically sort of, darker, gritty RPGs. So we started off, actually, myself and my co-host Matt, we started off being admins of the Ratcatchers Guild, which is a big Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Discord, and that sort of started us. So we do a lot of Warhammer content, but we also discuss lots of things such as Call of Cthulhu and other sort of cosmic horror, or there's quite a lot of OSR games we've been talking about lately, and most recently we've been doing a season 40k as well, because that's the origin of Grimdark, right? So we thought we only had to sort of pay some homage to it eventually. So here we are.
So, you don't have to sell it to me, but I know there's a lot of people who hear the term, grimdark gaming, and like, well, why would you want to play in something gritty and bloody and on some level sort of depressing, or like Call of Cthulhu, where, okay, yes, chances are you're either going to get eaten and ripped to shreds by the monster, not necessarily in that order, or you're going to go insane, or all three. And it's hard to explain, but it's a blast.
Yeah. I think to start with, I think it is important to acknowledge it isn't for everybody, right? In my mind, there's two primary reasons why people play RPGs. It's probably more than that, but I'm massively oversimplifying. There's a couple of primary reasons that people play, right? They either play for escapism. They want to get to do things that they don't get to do in the real world. They want to go be the hero. They want to go out there and be this larger of life character doing lots of cool things. That's fine. That's what you're into. That's fine. Some of us would much rather play to experience a form of catharsis, right? Like, if you go back in history to ancient Greece, right, they had the tragedies, which was you go and watch these plays that people are playing, and that always ended horribly. And the whole point of the tragedies was normal people do something wrong, stuff goes bad, something tragic happens at the end. And the reason it was there was to remind everybody that, hey, yeah, life is rough sometimes. This can happen to anybody, and that's okay, and we get to experience a form of catharsis by watching it happen to somebody else. And we get to help us mentally train, I guess, for the rough things that might happen in our lives. And when it comes to dark and gritty RPGs, in a lot of ways, for me anyway, it's the same sort of thing. It's I get to play a game where the horrible stuff will happen, trauma will be examined, and it's only going to go horribly wrong, but that's okay, because that's what we're here for, and it's about trying to find the small victories in amongst that, and showing that even though things go horribly wrong, you can overcome a lot of them sometimes. You can sort of get through it, or the background may be inevitably doomed, but the moment you've won the day, which is like you see that a lot in Lovecraftian horror. Like, yeah, the world will eventually get consumed, right? But for today, we've managed to kick that can down the road for just another day, and that sort of thing can help you, get through life, because life very much feels the same, if you're honest. So yeah, that's I think that's the joy of it. Plus, it's, I mean, grimdark fiction has been huge since the mid 80s, right? If anyone who read comic books in the 80s and 90s, and even film and media in general, shifted to a more grimdark lens. And I mean, most people who are listening to this have probably watched Game of Thrones. That's fairly grimdark. Like, we as a species seem to enjoy this sort of fiction, so getting to play it firsthand in an RPG makes sense.
Well, I think you touched on a couple things there. There is that element of, well, maybe, yeah, life sucks, but it's not as bad as this.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think there's also, like, to a certain point, maybe sometimes there's a little bit of freedom in making that what in real life would be a bad choice, but because it's a role-playing game, you can do it and laugh at the misfortune that follows as opposed to having to suffer it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, prime example, that's Merkborg, right? So Merkborg on the surface is just this horrible world. The apocalypse is happening, and people are playing through this fantasy world where things just keep getting worse, and eventually the world ends. The world will end. There's no way to stop it. And there's a lot of people out there who are like, well, why play that? And it's like, well, because it's fun. It's ridiculous. The things you get to do.
Yeah, that
when-
game's a blast.
Yeah, I've never not played that game, and I actually said this to somebody last week after playing it. I played it twice in the last week, and every time I've played it, it's been fun the whole time. There's never been that moment where it's just sort of lulling while we're waiting to figure out what happens next, or there's no dips. It's just, you've turned the volume up to 11 and you're having fun the whole time. And it's interesting because the creator, Johan, has stated several times quite publicly that it's an allegory for climate change, right? Like, it is a mirror of our own society racing towards an inevitable doom that we're seemingly ignoring and whatever. So it's like you get to live through this whole thing where it's like, man, it's just going tits up. So why not do the dumb thing that you always want to do, but you don't, because you're playing a serious game, and you just kind of want to go, stuff it. I'm gonna kick over this vial, which I'm sure has a ghost in it, just to see what happens, because we're all doomed anyway. Let's let's go out and have a bit of fun. Yeah, it's a blast. It's good fun.
Yeah, well, see, for me, the very first game I ever played was I got called to fill in for somebody who ditched on a WEG Star Wars game back in the 90s. But the first, campaign that I got to properly join and make a character for was a 5th edition Call of Cthulhu, and by that I mean the 5th edition of Call of Cthulhu. Not whatever this thing that Sandy Peterson released a couple years ago that I refuse to acknowledge is. But it was the original Delta Green, via Pagan Publishing, whatever, is what we were playing. And it was very kind of Monty Hall, like we all carried around 50 caliber caseless automatics and whatever. But and we fought predators and Daleks, and it was just general Cthulhu messed up worldness, right? But I don't know if because that was one of the first games I ever played, that in my mind that was just what to expect. And then the first D&D I ever played, and again, this was toward the tail end of 2nd edition, but the first D&D I ever played was Dark Sun. And so again, as a formative thing, it's like, well, this is what this is cool. And then people are got, regular D&D and whatever. And I'm like, well, this is, I mean, okay, it's kind of neat, but it's kind of boring. It's not as dangerous.
Yeah. My first ever roleplay game back in the early 90s, RuneQuest, right? And RuneQuest is pretty heroic. You're playing in a sword and sandals sort of style game with, gods are kicking about and you're champions of these gods and all that sort of stuff. It's very high fantasy. It's very mythical high fantasy. But it's also the sort of game where if you roll the wrong dice roll, your arm will get cut off. And there's no coming back from that, stuff like that. And it's a real brutal game. And I remember playing that and then later playing, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which again our name, Mud and Blood, comes from that, because that's supposed to be, Warhammer's described as like D&D, but you're knee deep in mud, blood, and excrement. We'll say that excrement, PG-13. So mud, blood, and excrement. So like I played all of that, and you get to D&D, you're like, hold on, we just need to have a nap, and we're back to full hit points. There's no like real risk to things. We can just go out and we can throw it all on the line and have a big epic fight, and then get hurt and everything along the way, then have a sleep for 8 hours, and we're good. And then, like, very quickly, as you level up, you get to level 5, and compared to a peasant, you're basically a god at that point. I was like, this doesn't feel right. There's no intrinsic risk, to the world around me. There's no feeling of like, actions have consequences. There isn't a narrative sense, but not in like your day-to-day. Like once you're level 5, you can effectively do whatever you want to it, like the merchant. You can call them whatever names they want. They can't. They might be able to narratively complicate your life, but they can't actually hurt you. And it was just like, man, this is just I want to feel like every person I meet on the road, if they decide to be horrible to me, would be dangerous. I kind of it makes the world feel more grounded. I kind of like that. But at the same time, as you say, with Grimdark, an important thing is the black humor of it, right? So some of the ridiculous situations you get into can also be a blast as well. It's about finding your right balance.
Well, yeah, that's like, I know a game that I ended up kind of picking it up, one, because of the background I just mentioned myself having, but also because of you reviewing it on the show, was Delta Green. And Delta Green, for those who haven't heard me talk about it or haven't found it, it's a great, great game, but it's a modern Call of Cthulhu spinoff where you play ultra quick pitches. It's the X-Files, but in reverse. The truth is out there, but you're trying to keep it hidden.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people miss in that is, because of the way they've set the game up, the real story of Delta Green in campaign play is watching the slow degradation of your character due to them compartmentalizing and, shelving away all this crap that they have to see and do, and the toll that takes on them in their regular life through the bonds mechanic. And to me, that's like the actual core story of the game.
It is, yeah. Yeah, we interviewed one of the creators. I can't remember which one, but we interviewed him on Mud and Blood, and he said the exact same thing. Like, that mechanic exists for that purpose. Actually, no, he didn't say that in the podcast. It was on Twitter, and it was Detwiller, who does all the art as well. He said it. It's ultimately the bonds mechanic is what the game is about. It is about degrading relationships and stuff like that. These relationships fall apart because you're out there doing the hard work, and you're trying to save humanity, but you can't tell humanity about it. They're not allowed to know. So you're coming home at the end of the day, and you're resorting to drink and all sorts of things to try and bury it. And because you're not open with your loved ones, the relationships suffer across the campaign. So it's the sort of thing that if you play a one shot, it's like this really dark, gritty, high action sort of thing. But if you play a campaign, it becomes kind of, anyone who comes from a broken home or has been through like a broken marriage or anything will immediately get what the game is about. It's very much about that sort of roly-poly and like sort of emotional roller coaster that, and then you have to start querying, well, why does this guy keep doing what he's doing? Why does my character keep going back? Does he still feels the same about Delta Green and these things that he's facing when it's cost him everything? And that creates a really interesting sort of character dynamic, and you can have a lot of fun with that. Like you are ostensibly playing heroes, you're playing people who are saving the world, right? But no one acknowledges that. They don't get all of the laudits that come with it. They don't even know each other's real names most of the time because they're all operating under pseudonyms. So they can't even catch up for a beer with the other people who they went through it with. If they do, Delta Green will get worried that they're going to let slip the secret and probably try and black bag them. So it's like this this really like sort of dark and grim thing that you can have a lot of fun with if you're into those sorts of stories. And it's excellent. But if you're listening to this and you haven't got Delta Green, get it. It's one of the best games ever written. I don't care what anyone says. It's awesome.
Well, I think the paraphrase your review was, buy this bleeping game.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it's a great game. Great game. So good. So good.
Yeah, I made Steve play it a while ago.
Oh yeah, I adore Delta Green, and I adore Delta Green because not just because it does that, but because I love stories of government conspiracy, and Delta Green is all
mm,
about government conspiracy.
mm.
Delta
Yeah,
Green is actively making you participate in the government conspiracy.
yeah. What I like about it too is like when I played it at home, one thing that was really hard for my players to adjust to was this idea of being powerful. You're ostensibly, you're government agents. You're walking around. You can flash the badge. You are the feds in the grey suits, But at the same time, no one else can know what you're doing. So you turn up and you flash your badge, and that might work with some civilians. But when the local cops what are you guys doing kicking around here? Like, and they start querying you on jurisdiction or whatever. When you're flashing your FBI badge, but it turns out you're not from the local FBI office. And some people start asking questions, and it becomes this weird sort of thing where you're like, you're a government agent. You're here. You're in control. You're in charge, but at the same time, it's all a lie, and and you have to try and like keep it sort of under wraps. That created a really interesting tension. And when I think back to it, when I played a relatively short campaign of my home group, back before COVID now, so it'd be nearly 2 years ago. The big moments, the moments where everything fell over, was less like sometimes obviously when the mythos turned up, but more often than not was when they ran into other law enforcement. And that's when the conspiracy becomes apparent. It's not about the mythos. It's not about saving the world. It's about maintaining the conspiracy. It gets really complicated. Or there's a really good adventure that they have where you have like a local reporter, like one of those, we all know those reporters who are like really well known in their town. And it's like they're like a well respected personality, but they very much thrive on shock reporting, shock journalism, and clickbait. It was that kind of a character who was following the party around and trying to like get the scoop on this murder that they were investigating. And just the idea of every time they walk out of a building, every time they walk out of a crime scene, there could be a reporter there with a microphone in their face, and they're very much on camera. They're trying to maintain this conspiracy, and they're on local news like constantly. Was great fun. It was excellent, and it led to some really like funny and amusing moments too when you're trying to come up with creative solutions. Like the problem solving element of that sort of a thing is great. Like if you're the sort of person who plays games because you enjoy trying to figure out what's happening or how to resolve this problem, if you like get your brain sort of firing, excellent for that. Really good. Just go get the game. Just go get it. Just get it.
That's the point, though, with grimdark play in general, though, I think, is that it does lend itself to creating those situations where you've got, what do you want to say? You've got more dials to turn as far as to create problems that aren't just kill it problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. I know what I'm thinking. I don't know if I'm saying it well.
No, I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I mean, for example, right? When you look at a game like Dungeons and Dragons, we use the well-known one. Almost every lever the game presents you mechanically, all the interesting ones at least, are all combat oriented. They're all combat abilities, they're all spells that work in combat and stuff like that. Beyond that, it's a series of 12 skill checks, right? So you're either rolling for insight or you're combating stuff, right? And that's just that's not interesting for me personally. And the only way that you can generally make those games interesting is either one, you're really into the tactical element of combat, in which case fine, or two, you kind of push the system aside and go into some narrative stuff away from the mechanics. With a lot of grimdark play, there's one big thing that's sort of omitted that exists in those more combat oriented games that are written for combat. There's a few of them, not just D&D, but games that are written with the expectation that there'll be a series of fights, and those fights will ultimately lead to you're going to get me down a game theory tangent here. So games that revolve around combat, right? Like D&D are ultimately resource management games. There's a reason why D&D abilities are use X times a day abilities, right? The whole thing is about a series of depleting your resources, and then the idea is hopefully you'll still have enough resources to overcome the big boss at the end of the dungeon. That's ultimately what the mechanics of D&D are trying to create, is that idea of you get X amount of resources per rest, and we're going to try and deplete them across like the 8 hours you're spending in the dungeon before your next rest. And hopefully If you're good at adventure design, you've depleted enough of those that the final boss fight is challenging, right? So it's this whole going around and around in circles, trying to drain your resources and hoping you don't just take a nap before you walk into the final boss dungeon. If you remove that element, if you remove the idea of someone is only in danger once their resources are depleted, and you make it so they're always in danger, you force players to become creative. They're never in a situation where they've got lots of resources and they're trying to just avoid depleting them. They're always in a situation of we need to think outside the box. And also, if you move away from the idea of you hit it to solve your problems, you also move away from the idea of therefore problems must be balanced to be hit to be solved, right? So we all know in D&D you talk about your CR rating and balancing encounters so that they drain just enough resources so that they can eventually make it to the interesting fight, the fight they want to have with the big boss, but with not so many resources that they just smash them in the first round of all their magic. So you end up with these situations where you're trying to balance it in a certain way to leech off like these resources. If you go to a game, and this isn't just true of Dark and Grim games, this is true of like a lot of the OSR, for example, has the same mindset around this stuff. If you go to games where there is no effort to do that, the game isn't about draining resources. The game is about, what you're doing in the fiction. It's fiction first. Then at that point, you don't need to worry about balance anymore. So there's no reason why you can't put, like if you're playing a fantasy gritty game, there's no reason why you can't have a room where there's a big dragon that would TPK the party in it, that the party has to get past to carry on the mission. There's no problem with that, because at that point, that dragon ceases to be an encounter that is designed to deplete resources, and it starts to be a problem that needs solving, right? You could hit it, but it will hit you back, and that's you dead. So we need to start thinking, how do we get around this? What do we do about this? Does one of us try and talk to the dragon? Do we try and sneak around the dragon? Do we maybe back out and find another way in here? When you remove this idea that at the start of every day, every time you wake up, you've got X resources, and your job is to keep as many of those resources as you can for the final encounter. Once you remove that from the equation, you change the way people think about games, and it becomes problem solving. The whole thing becomes problem solving. In Warhammer Fantasy, you generally try and solve your problems in interesting ways because, one, you're playing a game with a character sheet full of non-combat skills. That helps. Call of Cthulhu is the same. But also, two, if you hit things, they might turn around and hit you back. If they get a critical hit, you're dead. So there's always a risk. So you better get inventive. And hitting things becomes a last resort. In some games, hitting things becomes a fail state. If you're having to hit stuff, you've clearly gone wrong. You've failed at your job of problem solving. Unless you're absolutely in control of the situation when you decide to hit. Like if you're hitting things without meaning to, then things have gone really badly. So that's interesting, right? I find that quite compelling.
Yeah, and that's like another game that I've heard you mention it a time or two. I don't think you've ever really talked about it much on your podcast, but Cyberpunk 2020 and then its successor Red. I've told people before, this is a game that when you really read it, yes, the combat system is robust and there's tactical elements to it. But if you really look at it, that game was not designed for you to use combat as a first resort, because it is inherently an extremely risky endeavor to enter combat in that game, because a couple of wrong die rolls and you're done. I mean, we played it. Oh, yeah. Well, it was right at the start before COVID started, and first adventure, I was running a game. I blew a character's leg off. And like it's hard to explain to people that especially if they've come up in be it D&D or whatever games where your primary solution is hit it till it stops moving, that sometimes, like you said, you need to get creative to get around your problems. And in doing that, you can actually create these scenes and stories where so much more happens than I hit it really hard.
Yeah. And I think if you think about Cyberpunk, especially, I haven't played or really read the Cyberpunk games, but I love the genre, right? And I think if you actually think about it, with the genre, with a lot of the big fiction that are out there, a lot of the time, combat's not a thing. Like Blade Runner is the obvious influence for Cyberpunk, as is obviously the animes like Akira and Ghost in the Shell. If we're thinking about just to look at Blade Runner, in Blade Runner, combat is relatively rare, and it's more often than not quite quick and messy, right? Like especially that one where dickhead that's chasing the chick through the street and shoots her and she falls through the glass. That's quite a dramatic sort of chase scene, and there's a lot of tension and drama there, but there's not a prolonged gunfight compared to something like, say, James Bond, where like a James Bond game, you expect to have lots of combat. In a cyberpunk game, all of the interesting stuff that happens in a lot of cyberpunk fiction is the noir element. It's the things going on in the background. So you want the game to involve that. You want the game to involve interesting engagement with the world around them, and then you want combat to be messy and deadly when it happens, because that's how stuff is presented in cyberpunk, because ultimately cyberpunk is a crime noir genre. So you want things to be investigation, slow burn, and then when violence happens, it is quick, it is violent, it is messy, and it can go both ways. The hero's not, Arnold Schwarzenegger with a never-ending clip of bullets and everyone seems to miss him. He's not that. He's this vulnerable guy who really hopes he hits them before they hit him, and that's what makes it interesting, I think, or helps anyway.
Yeah, and again, it's hard to explain it, but it's like one of those things, like, what it is, but it's hard to articulate what you're looking for in this style of play.
Well, I think one of the things that can be said is that this style of play does existential dread better than any other game, where it's not so much about the immediate threat, more about, if we don't stop this, the implications are beyond our means. I think that's one of the things that Cthulhu really does, is that the cosmic horror series, or the cosmic horror games, can instill, that's the word I was looking for, a sense of, it's not just the world that's going to end, it's the world's going to end and it's going to be terrible for everyone, like, and I think that's something that
well, it's about high stakes, right? And like, again, that's where Delta Green's really clever, because it introduces family into the equation. Your bonds are close, people who are close to you. Those are the people who you lose if you fail, right? If you fail, the world ends, sure, but these characters that you have now drawn an attachment to as a player will also be lost, right? And that's it makes it more personal. And high stakes is key to any grimdark game. If you want to really talk, like, get into the brass tacks of what grimdark like sort of is, it's ultimately like the setting. Things are bad; they're not really going to get better. It's almost, some people describe it as misery porn, right? Like people are suffering, things are bad, or there's really bad stuff in the background that people don't know about that will make things terrible if you do not stop it. And that's sort of always there. There's that ever-present threat, and the players ultimately will never completely remove it. They can only hold it back or make it better for a moment, or make it better for a small group of people. And I think, that very much about high stakes. Everything is very, you get this wrong, things are only going to get worse. And there's genuine threats to this world. And it's not just like Mickey Mouse threats of, stuff that might come in and, oh no, the evil sorcerer is one. Like, it's like, no, actually, like, things we're really trying to make this work. Otherwise, the world is going to be devoured by, Azathoth, and we don't want that. So that helps, right? It helps motivate characters. And especially because the other element of it too is that characters are almost always relatable to us as people. They're not big heroes. They're not, very rarely are they larger than life sort of characters that go well beyond sort of the means that we could ever hope to achieve. You're playing Frodo, you're not playing Gandalf, right? Like, that's kind of the idea. You're playing a small person in a big scary world, not a powerful person in a normal world. You're not the Avengers or anything like that.
Right.
Even though you're playing for similar stakes. And I think it makes it easy for me anyway. I like being able to envision a character that I can relate, character that I can see myself, as opposed to,
May not be the greatest analogy, but it's Braveheart as opposed to King Arthur.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. No, it's like True Detective instead of James Bond. Like, True Detective, by the way, if you're into Delta Green, watch True Detective. Recommend it wholeheartedly. I'm just here to shill Delta Green and True Detective.
Well, you know what? At least you'll lend some credence to me constantly trying to get people in the server, our Discord server, to play Delta Green, because they're like, well, I don't know, like, look, it's really, really fun. What do you mean? You're going to kill us? Because I did get them to play Need to Know, and of course ended on a TPK because they decide to, well, not unanimously open the thing, and then one of them is pouring gas, and another one opens fire with a submachine gun and crit fumbled. And
I would just like to point out that my group took the coward's way out.
yes, yours did.
My group found the thing and called the boss and was like, "We found the thing. Come get it."
When we played it, my group was actually, it didn't help for whatever reason. One of my players had a bit more knowledge than you'd be comfortable with or expect them to have around septic tanks. So he started talking about different valves and things that should be on this tank. And I'm like rapidly having to think up solutions. And then they ended up trying to set it on fire, and it ended up escaping. They got out eventually, but it fled. I didn't have it kill them. I had it flee because it had already messed one of them up, and it was quite messed up and stuff. So I just had it run away into the woods, and they had to call the boss and be like, "Well, yeah, it's out there somewhere, and we don't know where it is." And then I had like newspaper reports of bad things happening in the following weeks.
The time I ran it where it went south, we only had, I want to say, maybe 2 rounds of combat before it went excessively bad.
And that encounter absolutely has the potential to, which is why I think it's important that you have it in like your quick start, right? You want to sort of teach people that these things can happen and get them used to the idea that consequences are a thing, especially if they're coming from like heroic fantasy, which most of us are when we get into hobbies. Learning that, yeah, you're a big scary agent on the end of a 9mm or whatever, but you know, like this thing is beyond, you know, our comprehension. It's I think that's important to sort of establish that early, and that's a pretty good adventure for doing it because it introduces you to it in a very controlled environment, and then it only goes bad if you make the situation worse. So it's very much like, well, you opened the hatch, here are the consequences, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, so to speak, you arrive on a contained situation. It only goes bad because you did a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You had to poke it. You're the one who decided to poke the beast. So, yeah, it's excellent like that. I really enjoy that. Speaking of situations going out of hand in Delta Green and stuff. Well, I played an adventure, Operation Fulminate.
Is that the one that's in the back of the Keeper's book or the Handler's Guide?
It might be. I think
The
so.
National Park one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one in the back of the
something rather Twilight Sentinels or something like that, it's called. I ran that adventure, and that went horribly wrong. That went really horribly wrong. Like, the kid starts freaking out and stuff, and when they first encountered their first sort of mythical sort of, their mythos entity, and they didn't know what to do about it, they fully lost control of the situation. They didn't have they had a code word, which was Chicago. If someone said Chicago, that was their take control of the situation. Now, they didn't discuss amongst themselves what take control of the situation means. So for a few of them, it was, okay, guns out, we're telling people to get down, we're in charge. And at that point, we're dropping the mask. Like here we are, we're in charge, get down. I don't care if you're a cop or whatever, get down. We're in charge. But for one of them, it was, you will do whatever you have to do to regain control of the situation. And he had seen this child, which is one of the key spoilers for anyone who might be playing this adventure, but he saw this child, which is attached to this whole thing that's going on, having a seizure, and then this mythos entity sort of fell out of this child and grew into this big thing. So he was like, okay, well, that thing over there is going nuts, this Shoggoth thing, and it's attacking the party, and it's scary. And this child that it fell out of is having this seizures. It's clearly somehow attached to the child. At that point, he didn't believe the child was a human. This is important to the story because he ended up deciding to shoot it and killed the kid, right? Unfortunately, he was mistaken on all counts. And the Shoggoth kept going, and he had just killed the kid, which is pretty traumatic, as you can imagine. Huge sand loss. And also, for him as a player, he was a father. So him making that decision was quite a big move on his part. But it ended up like with this really dark situation where now local law enforcement had seen him do this. This guy was a murderer at that point, right? the whole thing went tits up, very violent. They ended up barely containing like the situation, but clearly the outcomes, the ramifications of what was going to happen was huge. And the big thing is that game's on a timer. You know that law enforcement are turning up first thing in the morning. Local FBI is turning up in the morning. You have to resolve the situation before then. So they went to the top of the national park and they destroyed the local dam just to flood the crime scene and completely cover up all evidence because it was all they had left. They had gone so far to try and save the day. They'd gone well and truly just too far into the depths of this thing that they ended up just scorching the earth.
Yeah. It strikes me that in some ways, and again, maybe this is my brain putting together weird analogies, but that grimdark gaming, the attraction, a lot of it's like playing Walter White going through Breaking Bad, where you make this
Yeah.
decision for a good reason and this decision for a good reason, and then you have to make this other decision to protect your other decisions, and all of a sudden it's something way, way bigger than what you intended, and you're scrambling to try and stay ahead of yourself.
It can be, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the key to being good at running these games is to trying to keep it within that too. So like for example, it would have been very easy to like it can be easy just to be a horrible person in these games. And it can be easy just to run a game where everyone's playing bad guys. And I don't think that's actually the point. I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's about humans making human decisions, right? People make it like, we are flawed. We are often making decisions with incomplete information and making leaps of logic and assumptions, and then playing through and doing actions based on that poor knowledge, and then running through the consequences. It's all about action and consequences, right? That's why the stakes have to be high. You've got high stakes, and you're in a world which isn't set up to cater to you. The world doesn't just exist as a device for you to interact with as players. It's a living, breathing world with actions and consequences happening within it, and you are interacting with it. And there's always consequences to your actions, for better or worse. And I think that's where it gets interesting, because then that process in which you gain that information and make those decisions has value over top of this is a sterile dungeon that only really exists for you to interact with it. And ultimately, all that matters is the ending, right? Like we remove that from the equation entirely. And it's more living, breathing world where there has injustice happening within it. People are out there sort of making their way through this sort of stuff, and you're interacting with it all and trying to make these decisions that have a lasting impact. What do you do? You're not always going to have the right information. And that is where the fun comes. And then playing through those consequences. Like it could have been quite easy had we been a party of people who sort of didn't respect the gravity of the situation. When the character did what he did and ended up shooting that child, which is a pretty I mean, I'm sure everyone listening can agree it's a very extreme out. We could have quite easily sort of black humored it and laughed it off or whatever, and just gone on being horrible, but we didn't. We made sure that we respected the gravity of that situation, and that's where the drama came from that we played through. It wasn't just like, lol, we're murder hobos, look at us just killing people because we're Delta Green. It was like, no, actually, like he genuinely thought he was doing something to save a lot of people there, and it was a hard choice to make, and he made it. And not only was it a hard choice to make with big consequences, it was the wrong choice. And that just led to like this ever escalating situation that drove that adventure in directions that you wouldn't have had if it had have been if that hadn't have been an option, if that sort of a thing didn't exist. If we played a game where we didn't do that sort of thing. People who don't want to play those games, I'm not judging you. I'm not saying this is a superior form of play, but it's by opening yourself up to truly grim stuff, you can really get into the weeds of motivation and all that, and sort of go through a pretty heavy session, but still enjoy it. And at the end of it, sort of experience stuff with your friends that you wouldn't otherwise. It was quite eye opening, good fun. I know it sounds really bad to say, but it was good. It was interesting getting to this point where, well, now what do you do, right? You've shot these local cops, you've shot this kid, all this thing's gone horribly wrong, and you still haven't figured out what's happening yet. they made the decision to scorch the earth as such, just try and cover it up as best they can because they are the conspiracy, and they're not the good guys. They thought they were, but they found out they weren't. They found out how far they were willing to go, which I think is important to experience. Good fun.
Yeah, I think it's a different style of play, and that's something that I think that people should be aware of, is that, if you're the game master for your group, these aren't necessarily the type of games you just want to spring on them, because one, buy-in is extremely important in that
Yeah.
everybody needs to be down to play this kind of thing. And two, I think it's also important, especially if you're just venturing into this kind of play, to set some boundaries, be they formal safety tools or whatever, because like you mentioned in the game that you played, you had someone literally shot a child. Well, objectively, that's obviously a very horrible thing. And like you said, in your case, the player involved was actually a father himself. But at the same time, it's like we said at the beginning, it's hard to explain, but it can be fun if everyone is. It's not yuck laughs fun, but you can leave feeling very fulfilled. I guess maybe is a better way to say it.
Yeah, like also I mean, those safety tools are key, and also, I mean, this is true of any game. I don't care if it's grimdark or not. Having everyone at the table agree that this is what we want to play and this is what we're going to do is vital. If you're not having those discussions, you're going to run into issues, right? So making sure everyone knew what it was. Now, in that particular situation, that was something that we hadn't really covered before. It's not something we do regularly. So when he was saying, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm going to shoot this kid," there was a pause at the table, and it's like, "Oh, okay, are we doing this?" And everyone around the table sort of like, "Yeah, I guess, just do it tastefully." Like as tastefully as you can, I guess. Don't make this like a comedy moment. So we went through it, but not every game has to be that grim and dark. I definitely recommend, if you're looking at getting into grim dark games, look at something like Warhammer, where there is like a tongue-in-cheek, like tongue firmly implanted in cheek element to it, where things are horrible and grim and gritty, but at the same time they're kind of amusing. Merkborg's another good one for the same thing. Like, it's dark and grim and the world is going tits up, but we're here to have fun at the same time. How serious or how fun you want to have, like, there's a full range in there of grimdark. But I do think it allows you to do something which, like, explore layers of emotion in a way that more sort of hero fantasy games don't. I mean, you can still have a lot of emotions in a hero fantasy game, and you can have a lot of personal stakes, but that's very much dependent on your table and how you manage it. Whereas I think grimdark games require a level of vulnerability right from the get-go that allows you to have these cathartic moments and to go through this stuff and see where it takes you and what you'll do, and these interesting sort of moral and ethical dilemmas, which in a safe environment, right? You can explore, like, what would I do if this was the situation? And then at the end of it, we put the dice down, we finish off the snacks, we have a laugh, and you get to go home and go back to your normal life, right? Like, it's a safe way to actively enjoy or actively partake in interesting quandaries that don't impact you in reality. Whereas that's not true of if you were to encounter this sort of stuff in like a lot of our day-to-day problems, we often think about, well, how am I going to do this? There's a lot of things you just can't explore. So I don't know. Am I making sense?
I think one of the things that grimdark does, and we've talked about catharsis, but in my opinion, and this is just a general observation, a lot of the people that I've talked to that are into grimdark games are also into metal music. Okay. And so it's that same catharsis that you get from listening to metal. It's the this is dark and gritty and heavy, and I love it. It lets me get the rage out that I've had to deal with all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of that same yin and yang catharsis type thing. I've talked to a lot of people that are really into Call of Cthulhu and stuff, and it's like, well, what do you listen to? Well, I'm a big heavy metal guy. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't shock me.
That moment on that note, that moment in the intro to Walk where the drums come in,
Oh,
like that.
yeah.
That if you're into it, you know exactly what I mean. That sensation when the drums
Yeah.
kick in the beginning of that song, it's just like, oh yeah.
My girlfriend hates to be in the car when that song comes on because the radio immediately goes up to 11. Like, it goes up as loud as it can go.
Yeah.
She always goes, "I hate this song." I'm like, "I love it."
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like, yeah, you're right. It's similar to that. Like, listening to heavy metal doesn't make you. A lot of people who don't listen to it think you're angry, right? I've been listening to heavy metal my whole life. I've got albums and shit out. I'm a musician. This is what I do. Right? I love it. A lot of people seem to think that you're into heavy metal because you're angry and you've got all this rage. I'm one of the happiest people you'll meet. Like, I don't go around inflicting violence on people and shit. I'm generally a pretty chill person. And a part of it is because I have these emotional outlets. I can listen to some heavy music and get adrenaline out. I can play a game and get out some sort of, like I have a really depressing job. All right. This is sorry, folks. We're going into Uncle Liam's story time. My job is I help homeless people who are in the mental health and addiction space, right? I'm a consultant and advisor specifically for the people who are the hardest people to house in the city I live in. And New Zealand at the moment is having a housing crisis. So the numbers in this country are huge, people that find homes for. But I'm specifically working with a very pointy end, people coming out of prison and very high and complex needs, multiple coexisting high and complex needs. So I spend a lot of time advocating for people who, frankly, the current solutions that exist aren't for them. And I have a lot of time having to explain to agencies we're going to have to accept that this person is going to continue being homeless and that's going to continue causing them harm. And it's quite a stressful job. Being able to then take the emotions that I get to experience and go through from that job and then turn that into fuel for a game is key for me. Now, that's how I work through this stuff. A lot of other people who would go do the same thing I do would probably, the last thing they want to do is experience the darker emotions. And they'd probably much prefer going the other way towards the escapism side of it. But I think that's key, right? Is that for me, what helps me work through this stuff is, as you say, heavy metal music, dark and grim game. I don't really watch comedy TV shows, sitcoms. Don't like them. Just not interested in them. They bore me. I like watching, thriller movies. The 90s was great for thriller movies. I believe that the 90s was one of the best eras for film. I don't care what anyone says. So, I'll watch Seven or I'll go and watch, the other day I watched Memento, loved it. Shutter Island's one of my favorite movies, things like that. And a lot of people, if they listen to all of that, probably think I'm a really, I don't know, a not well-adjusted individual. But I'd say, no, it's because I watch that stuff that I get to intellectually work through my stuff.
Well, if I could ask quickly along that vein, do you think some of it is perhaps that, okay, the tensions and whatever that get stirred up by what you do professionally, are those similar to the tensions that you find building in say grimdark games, and that in resolving the issues that you come up against in grimdark games, it helps you release the tension that's built up from work?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a big part of it, like being able to go and sort of get that stuff out. We call it in the mental health space, we call it co-regulation, right? So co-regulation is when you take yourself from like a struggling regulated space and then you connect with other people and together you bring yourself back to a regulated mood, right? You adjust your emotional state of being. And I think that by getting to go through some tense stuff with friends and company that you trust to get along with, and then resolve it, get to the end of it, for better or worse, but it gets resolved. You get to the end of it, and then afterwards, it's like, okay, cool, we worked through that. We got to explore some stuff there, and then you get to go back to life and be fine. I think that's huge, absolutely. And saying that, you don't need to have a rough job to like grimdark games. There's heaps of people out there who don't, but I do think you see it a lot with like grimdark has changed since the 80s. It used to be a lot more tongue-in-cheek, and these days it's a lot more serious. And I believe that's also because of like the broader changing of society we've had in that time, where in the 80s a lot of that grimdark stuff, apart from the fact that we had an ongoing Cold War, a lot of it didn't feel very believable or authentic. It seemed ridiculous. And then the 90s, then 9/11, etc., the state that the world came into, we started taking that stuff a bit more seriously because we acknowledged that actually some of these things, there's a bit more going on in the world than we thought. And I think that's interesting to see how the overall genre has evolved, but that also might, that's something to bear in mind when you get into it as well, is your experiences with the world are likely to define what you consider grimdark, or how you approach grimdark might change based on whether or not you yourself have any sort of lived experiences that relate. Like, I think a big part of why I like Delta Green so much is because it does a really good job of addressing, like a trauma, PTSD, stuff like that, whereas a lot of games don't. A lot of games just sort of oversimplify that stuff and push it to the side. And I think it's good to sort of be confronting with some of that stuff because it's reality, But yeah.
Well, it brings in some sense, it brings some awareness to the fact that it is a real issue in some people's lives.
Yeah, but also like some people might be experiencing that at your table and not done anything about it, and then getting to sort of experience some of those feelings in a game might help them mentally address that they've got this stuff going on. Has a absolute potential to go the other way and trigger them, which again is why safety tools are important. But I think being able to, like, again, we get back to that catharsis, right? It's not all about catharsis though. For me, that's a big part of why I play. But a lot of people do play a lot more tongue in cheek and a lot more, like a bit ridiculous and fun and all that sort of stuff. But it's it varies from person to person, which is what's cool about our hobby in general, right? It's the same for there's a lot of people who will listen to me describe D&D earlier and completely disagree with me, which is fine. That's the joys of our hobby. We have a lot of choices.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it, right? There's thousands, if not millions, of games out there, and just because you don't like this one, or you don't like how the group you're playing with likes to play games, doesn't mean that there isn't a game out there that fits you just right, and there aren't people out there who want to play the way you do.
Mm, mm.
It's just a
Yeah.
matter of finding them, which is admittedly much easier said than done.
I think we're getting better there though, right? As there's more communities, like, for example, you've got a Discord, we have a Discord. There's more ways to find people who are at least interested, broadly speaking, in the same stuff as you. And then through those, you're more likely to find people. Now the world is smaller than it's ever been around finding people with the hobby. And on top of that, our hobby is bigger than it's ever been. So there's more people to access, and it's a lot easier to access than we've ever had before in the history of the hobby. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have a lot of difficulties and you're going to try a few sort of dud tables, but we are getting there. The amount of people that come and talk to us at Mud and Blood going, I really want to play grimdark games. I really want to play something a bit more serious or whatever, but my table will only play Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's like, well, that's fine. Or they'll only play Cypher System or, whatever game they're into. It's like, that's fine. Just find some other people to play with here and play with him on a different day of the week. Or instead of being the GM, be a player for a change and play online with some people. Easier said than done. Not for everyone necessarily, but I think there are options out there,
Yeah. Well, and the online presents its own challenges to a certain point because of time zones and disparate schedules.
Yeah.
But at the same point, it's a bigger pool to find people in that might match whatever your weird scheduling circumstance is, because maybe in the time zone they live in, it's not a weird time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for years, and I've only been playing in person for the last 3 years since I was a child. So when I was young, I got into RuneQuest and all that sort of stuff, played in person for a while, stopped playing the hobby for a bit. When I came back, I was playing online for over a decade. And I played with people from Europe, Australia, America, all of that. We had like really weird time zones, but that worked for me because I was working nights. So the only time I could play was, in these other people's time zone. And it was great. It was awesome. I still play with this group to this day. If you've ever listened to Mud and Blood has an actual play called Carrying Company. Sean, who runs Carrying Company, the GM, he's been my GM online for like over a decade. And if you ever want to get an idea of like what grimdark can be, to toot my own horn and do a bit of promo, go and listen to Carrying Company on Mud and Blood, because Sean is an amazing GM. He really straddles that line between black humor and laughs, but at the same time, like consequences. Your actions have consequences. The world won't always react favorably to you. And it works really well. I aspire to be half as good a GM as he is.
I will say I listened to that whole campaign, and he is amazing. And,
Mm.
like, I love how, like, that whole campaign, to a certain point, your characters were just a bunch of and I don't mean this to be offensive, your characters were just a bunch of mercenary schmucks.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And yet the stakes in the moment were very high, even though in a grander picture it wasn't that much. And I think
Yep.
that's what you were talking about, how the world is the core behind, I think, Grimdark is that, yes, the world is big and behind you and all this, and what you do may have an impact on that, but the chances that anyone ever knows that you're the ones who kept this bad, awful thing from happening are pretty slim.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was great. We're actually recording season 2 at the moment, and I'm looking forward to getting that out because that's exploring slightly different realms, a lot more inner party conflict. It's quite cool.
Aha.
But yeah, yeah, no, like I think because yeah, Sean really, like as I said, as a GM, he really strikes all the right sort of balances for what Grimdark can be. And like it's fun, there's still tongue in cheek, there's still amusing moments, but at the same time, there's serious stakes especially for the party specifically. And like there's things going on and the world is happening around you and you're just sort of in it, you're reacting to it. Yeah, it's quite neat. And especially because that was completely sandboxed too. It's not like he wrote a plot and we played through the plot. We had a lot of agency over where we went and what we did. At multiple points throughout the campaign, off sort of screen as such, we were offered options. Which way do you go? Which contract do you accept? What way do you go? And that drove the direction the campaign went in. So he was reacting to our decisions as well, and it worked really well.
Yeah.
But it really grabbed like what for a lot of people, it really grabbed what the Warhammer world is. And the Warhammer world in many ways, like Warhammer and 40K, those two things are very much like if you want to know what Grimdark is, look there. And then from there go outwards. So having such a good representation of that, I think was really good. Actually, on that note, if you want to know what Grimdark is, there's a YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions, I think, and they do a video on Grimdark where they talk about its origins, how it came out in the 80s, and everything that went through it. And they also talk about some of the pitfalls too that can happen where stuff does just become misery porn, and it's not about like the cathartic elements and stuff like that. And I think it's really good to watch that because it frames things a lot. Because if anyone who grew up reading comics in the 90s and stuff, you were reading Grimdark. Like if you read Killing Joke and all that sort of stuff, all those stories that come out in that era, like Batman went from the old Batman you had back in the day with his grey outfit and stuff, and beating up Penguin in a top hat, to like dark and gritty stuff that was going on in the 90s. And I think that was
Miller's Dark Knight.
yeah, exactly, yeah, all that stuff is like we were telling stories for a reason. We were going in that direction for a reason. I think if you can sort of get your head around it, you might find it's what you're into, or not. Again, like I'm sitting here advocating. If all of this goes, this sounds horrible, then hey, it ain't for you, and that's fine. You're welcome to not like it. You're welcome to disagree with me. I'm kind of challenging.
No,
That's the joy of the hobby. Yeah.
I think that's very well said. So, what else do we have? Anything more you want to touch on in regards to Grimdark Gaming that we haven't kind of? I know we've kind of rambled and gone here and there, but that's what we do. So,
I think it's really there's a lot of cool stuff out in this space of differing sort of angles, right? Like so don't if you play one thing and it kind of works for you but it doesn't, then go and look for like don't be put off by that. There's a lot of people I know. For example, 9 out of 10 people I talk to love Merkborg, but there's 1 in 10 that don't like. Figure out what you don't like. I'm sure there's something else out there that will work for you, right? There's lots of different angles, and because Grimdark can be anything. It can be dark fantasy. It can be like Vampire the Masquerade was pretty grimdark in a lot of ways. Those old World of Darkness games. It can be like 40K. It can be sci-fi. It can be cyberpunk. There's so many things you can latch on to in the genre that is varying degrees of grim and dark as well. So you don't need to go straight to Delta Green shooting children. You don't need to do that. That's definitely the result of decades of playing grim dark games. Yeah, it's you can do all sorts of stuff. And saying that, Delta Green, that you don't need to do what my players did to play Delta Green. I definitely recommend get Delta Green. It's great. At least look at the free quick start. I think it's free.
Yeah, well, I think it's technically pay what you want
Right.
in the
Yeah.
digital format. The other thing I will say is, I think as far as what you get in that quick start, it is one of the most robust kickstarts I have ever seen. It actually has character creation rules, and really, most of the rules to Delta Green are not that complex. It's not. I mean, there are a few fiddly bits and a few more technical things, but for the most part, it's a very simple D100 roll under system. You can tell instantly whether you've succeeded or not, you
Mm.
know. But like I find that quick start, because it gives you some pre-gens, but it also gives you basic character creation rules. Maybe not as fully detailed as they are in the book, but they're
Yeah.
still solid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good like of the BRP derived mechanics too. I think Delta Green in many ways is like the streamlined like I love Call of Cthulhu. I'm playing a Call of Cthulhu campaign as we speak. Yet I still every time I play it, I'm like, yeah, this is great. I really like this game. And I absolutely I've been playing that game for decades. Loving it. Yet I still think, yeah, but Delta Green does a lot of the stuff better. Just little things like the way it handles opposed rolls and the way it handles
It's just
critical.
slightly more elegant, to put it
Yeah.
simply.
Yes. Yeah. Elegant, and that's important, I think, in game design. But I'll try and avoid going down a game design rabbit hole again. What about you? What's really important? What do you like about Grimdark?
I think we kinda touched on it for me. It's that, like you said, I think, and I hadn't thought about it in these terms, but I think it's that you get a chance to, so to speak, deal with the emotions that your real world problems cause you in a context where if you make a bad decision, you don't have to pay for it in reality.
Mm.
That it like you said, it's that catharsis, or the just for generic, we'll say you work a job where you get chewed out by a customer and you really just want to reach over the counter and punch him in the face.
What are you talking about me, Steve? What are you It's my day-to-day
We've
life. That is
we've all
what
been
I do for a
there,
living.
But like in the context of a game, you could reach over the counter and punch him. That's probably a little more of a D&D solution. But
and
you know what I'm saying? Like you can tell him to bugger off and walk out and quit your job in the context of the game and get that kind of release without then having to go, well, crap, how do I pay rent next month? How do I pay my car loan, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like that catharsis.
although that's a great adventure seed. You've just told this guy to shove it. You've walked out of your job. You have to pay rent next month. You got your dodgy mate over here is offering you a way to make some quick cash, but it's a bit dodgy, you know.
That's well,
Like,
that's a Delta Green character is what that is.
yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
the agency walks in and goes, "Hey,
Yeah.
we can guarantee that your bills are paid. All you gotta do is help us do a little bit of cover up."
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man, I love dark and grim games. It's
Well, what do you look for in a Dark and Grim game?
Um, I don't know. For me, it's sort of how I enjoy I enjoy metal music and I enjoy dark and grim games because of the aesthetic most of the time.
Mhm.
Like it's that feeling, it's the like Morkborg's the perfect example of that. When you open
Yeah.
Morkborg's book, it's all aesthetic. Like that book is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. It
It's a
is one of the
yeah, it is.
coolest, most well-designed books I think I've ever touched. Like, for as little information as it puts on the page, you get every bit of information you need, but still getting the coolest book in the world. And it's that. It's like I love the conspiracy around Delta Green. I love the weird religious tones around like 40K and
Mm.
Warhammer. You know, everything with like the Space Marines and stuff like that. It's you get into some cool stuff in Dark and Grim, and that's what I look for. I look for an aesthetic, and that's always what I look for in games, and that's why I get drawn to this stuff because I'm like, well, it's dark, it's gritty, but it's dark and gritty in interesting ways.
Mm, mm.
Well, I think that black humor element is a major factor for me too, in that when you're at the table and it's an agreed upon thing that you're playing this, it's okay to laugh at those things that you probably shouldn't if something like that comes up in your day-to-day life.
Well, because you kind of have to. Some of the stuff is so ridiculous. Like, especially once you start getting into, let's say, 40K, where the Imperium is this huge, like bureaucratic, theocratic, fascist, medieval style space empire. Like it is just so ridiculous that you can have some truly dark and grim moments in there, but at the same time, just like Sean once told me that his ideal campaign is you're playing 40K, you're these guardsmen, right? You're the core foot soldiers of the Imperium. You land on a planet, and you're persecuting a war against rebels that look very similar to you, but they are worshipping the wrong kind of emperor. And you fight them, and then after some time, you get declared, excommunicatum. You get declared heretics or whatever, and then there's a war being persecuted against you, and you realize that, like, because you're dealing with such a massive bureaucracy that is the Imperium, it's so huge, it's a million worlds. They like messages get mixed all the time. And then to top it all off, he said that he wanted to have a moment where you find like a set of orders or like a recording or some maps or something from the rebels that you were fighting, who you beat before you got declared rebels, right? And it turns out that they got sent to the wrong world entirely. The world that they were supposed to be going to is somewhere else completely. It's just ridiculous. It's like we're just here dying because of like some crossed wires and people going to the wrong place. And now, well, as people realize that, going, hold on, this war shouldn't be happening. What are we doing? Because you have the gall to challenge the Imperium, you are now the enemy, and we're going to kill you. It's ridiculous. It is absolutely. You have to laugh, but it is like at the same time playing through that is dramatic AF.
But it that's such a 40K story though too. Like
Yeah,
that's such a Warhammer adventure that I just recently started getting into the Warhammer lore and some of that stuff. I had a buddy that's always been into it. He's like, "Oh, you got to check this out. You'd love it. You'd love it." And I was like, "These books are tomes. Like I don't have time to read this." So I started getting into it finally, and I'm like, "I love this." I don't know why I was like so apprehensive before about it, but that's such a quintessential. Like you look at some of the chaos stuff, and then just some yeah, I love it. Like that's how you tell a 40K story, right? Like
we interviewed Rick Priestley, which is the guy who created 40K. And I told him that story, and he just started adding to it like automatically. He's like, okay, and you get that stuff, and then you get it back to HQ. You get all the way there, and then there's this bunker, right? And inside the bunker is where command is. And if you get them that information, that'll get you off the world. It's really important you get there. You do all this heroic stuff to get there. You go through the ringer, and it turns out that they're closed for Sunday prayers. And then you finally get them the orders. So you got to go through all this more stuff, and you finally get them the orders, and they go, right, okay, put it in that pile there. We'll get to it. It's a massive pile, and you're like, this is really important. They go, look, we'll prioritize it. We'll put it closer to the top. And you're like, okay, well, it's going to get looked at eventually. We just need to go hide out for a few weeks. And you move away, and as soon as you leave, artillery hits it and just vaporizes it. And you're like, what? It's just the pointlessness of it all. It's just so, it's hilarious. You have to laugh at it because it is ridiculous.
The pointlessness of bureaucracy. Yeah, like, oh man, I love that.
That does sound
so
like I would play that game. I mean,
yeah. No, it's just it'd be great fun. It really would. And you'd have to laugh, even though like the connotations of that information, like them not being open today or whatever, means that thousands of more soldiers are dying needlessly. That's really grim. That's really sad. But just the irony of it is hilarious.
Yeah, then you get into some of the mechanics of that world of like how space travel works and some of that stuff. It's like, what? Why does this have to be this dark? Like, why did we need? Why do our engines need souls? Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, all it takes is one guy who asks the logistical questions, and everybody's like, "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! You're a heretic!" Like,
that's it.
we've talked about Morkborg a little bit, and I've told some people I recently had an online conversation. I don't remember where it was, but I described Morkborg as kind of a Ted Nugent of RPGs, and by that I mean that it is loud in your face and unapologetically what it is, and you either love it or you hate it. There's
Yeah.
very few people, I'm going to guess, that'll pick up Morkborg and go, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it definitely knows what it is. Which again, we're coming back to like a game design discussion, right? But like, I think it's important that a product knows what it is and what it's trying to achieve, and it latches onto that. And Merkborg is like they've boiled everything they wanted down to a pure essence, and that's sort of what you get. It is a doom metal song represented as a physical product. Like it is. It's
yes,
great.
and that's how I've pitched it to my friends, and they were like, "I'm sold." Because I showed my buddy, I'm like, "Check this out." He's like, "Okay, I don't get it." I'm like, "No, you do get it. It is like death metal and all of the like, the Norwegian metal." And he's like, "Oh, that's it. You're right. That's what it is." I'm like, yeah, you'll get it. I love Morkborg so much. I don't get to talk about it enough because it's such a hard one to talk about because it's a hard sell for like a lot of people. It's like, oh, how do I sell this to somebody who's not prepared for how dark and gritty this is? But if you do a little preparation and get yourself in a mindset where you're like, okay, I got to be prepared. This is going to be really dark. It's going to be really gritty. It becomes a really fun game.
Yeah, absolutely. The game I ran just a week ago today even, I ran Merkborg for a group of our patrons, and one of the people, this was his first time playing. He'd never played before, hadn't read it or anything like that. He'd heard about it obviously, but that was it. And just like hearing some of his like laughs throughout of just like how laughing at the ridiculousness, I could tell I was getting in there. I could just like yeah, his reactions were just sort of almost incredulous. He just couldn't believe what was happening and the things I was describing. And at the end of it, he was like, "Oh no, I love this game. I didn't know what was happening half the time, but I love it. I just love it. It's excellent. It's really, yeah. It's the other end of like what I was describing before with Delta Green. It's the opposite end of that spectrum of just ridiculous. Yeah, I love it.
Morkborg, if I'm not, it really, in a lot of ways, encourages you to drive your character like it's a stolen car.
Yeah. Well, like especially like I want to run an actual play of it on our channel at some point, but specifically like as an anthology. So instead of you worrying about your character surviving session to session, we're not telling that story. We're telling the story of the apocalypse of this world, right? So TPKs are to be expected. We're not following specifically the characters. We're following the actions of the various people within as the canvas upon which the world is ending, because it's got that mechanic, right? The miseries where you keep getting closer and closer to the apocalypse. I want to play through that. I want to see what the world looks like falling over. And the great thing is, it would only be 6 sessions, and at the end of the 6th one, the world ends. Right? Like that's a known. Like at the end of the 6th session of this campaign, guys, the world ends. Right? You cannot stop this. Let's play until that point. And I think another game that does it, like if you want a similar style of that but more structure or more D&D-ish, look at Shadow of the Demon Lord. Shadow of the Demon Lord was written by Rob Schwalb, who's written heaps of games out there. He's written for Warhammer, he's written even for D&D, he's written for a whole bunch of stuff. And Shadow of the Demon Lord is like streamlined D&D. If you're coming from a D&D background and you're not quite ready to jump into the rules light stuff that you get with Merkborg, Shadow of the Demon Lord would be great. And he's a metalhead. The way he writes, I've spoken to him a few times now, is we all know that if you're writing for a long period of time, you're better off to cut your day up into chunks, right? Where this is your dedicated writing time, this is your rest time. The way he does it is he puts on an album and he writes, like he's got this big collection of heavy metal albums. He'll put one on and he writes until that album stops. And then he gets up and he goes and plays with his cats and he has a meal or whatever. And then he comes back and puts the next one on. And he goes, so, sometimes it's a quick one. I'm listening to Rain and Blood by Slayer, and it's a 28-minute writing session. Other times, it's an extended album, some conceptual album. It's like Dope Smoker by Sleep, and I know it's just going to be one song for an hour, and I just start writing, and what comes out, and you can tell if you go and look at that game, it is dark, gritty, grim, dark fantasy, but with definitely more of like a D&D power structure behind it in terms of mechanics, very streamlined, and it feels like it's got that heavy metal stuff the same, but not nearly as distilled down as Merkborg, as Merkborg definitely embodies, like, Rob Schwalb is like the big four, with and various offshoots, whereas Merkborg is Emperor running through the woods of Norway filming a music video. Like it's very very different sort of extremes, but it's very good. Very good.
Well, I think we've covered as much as we can. I mean, you have a whole podcast dedicated to dark and grim games, so but I think it's time, unless you have something else to add, Steve.
Well, I was just going to ask Liam if he'd like to let people know where they can find him. I know he has some other projects in the works besides just his podcast. But if you'd like to take a minute to talk about any and all of that stuff.
Absolutely. So the obvious one is Mud and Blood, which has been going for 3 years now. And it's a combination of us talking and actual plays and stuff like that. So a lot of stuff I've referenced here, a lot of the interviews and things all happened over there. And it's mbcast.co. And me and my co-host Matt talk about all sorts of stuff. We interview lots of creators. We do game reviews and all of that. We are looking at doing a refresh of the brand soon. Don't know exactly what that will look like yet. Matt's about to have another kid. We're going to have to readdress how that all works. But at the moment, there's 3 years worth of content you can go and look at. We figure out what comes next. So there is that. But the other thing I do is I've got a brand called Toa Tabletop, Toa being TOA, tabletop.com, which there isn't a hell of a lot there. It's my personal sort of focus towards my game creation stuff that I do, which is why I tried to not stray too much into game design theory on this channel, because that is a rabbit hole. If you think Grimdark's a big rabbit hole, you wait until you start talking about game design and what it means if you choose a D6 or a D20. Like that's the stuff has impact. So that's a whole different thing. If you head to toatabletop.com, you can see things I've written for and done editing for and stuff like that. And also there is I've been a bit slack and been a bit inactive on it this year, but I'm preparing in the next year to hopefully run a Kickstarter for a game I'm working on at the moment called Fistful of Sixes, which is like you're playing Western Outlaws, spaghetti Western style sort of stuff. If you like the Dollars trilogy, or if you liked Red Dead Redemption, this is hopefully the game for you. So I'm working on that, and over the next year I'm going to start ramping up my blog and stuff and talking about that a lot more as I build up release for that. But like I said, I'm still waiting to see where Mud and Blood lands and what that's going to look like before I really commit strongly to what's coming in the next year. But that is a thing. It's got a system I developed myself called the Blackjack system, which is really fun. I really enjoy it. So and I'm planning on spawning a lot more stuff out of that. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
That's not a Weird West setting, right? That's a like you said, spaghetti Western, classic non-magical type setting, correct?
Completely non-magical. That said, being a Kickstarter, one of the things I've thrown around as a stretch goal is like a Weird West supplement for it. But in saying that, I mean, the mechanics, there's nothing in the mechanics that stop it being a Weird West thing. And there is one mechanic especially which, if you just flip it so it goes in a different direction, instead of it being a dropping ceiling, it becomes a rising floor, if that makes sense. With that one mechanic, if you flip it, it becomes a very good horror game. So that is likely to be how I introduce that as like a horror Weird West sort of thing at some point, but we'll see.
All right, cool.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah. Well, we still have one segment of the show left, so why don't we get into Game of the Week?
Game of the Week.
Game of the Week. Game of the Week.
So we told you what this was, Liam.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like one of us to go first, and so you get a little bit of a feel for it, or are you ready to jump right in?
How about one of you guys goes first? But I want to be cheeky because there's two things I want to recommend. Can I recommend two?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, why not?
One of you guys go first, then I'll do one, and then you do one, and then I finish with one. How's that work? Does that work?
That sounds good.
That sounds good.
Sorry, I'm just here taking over your podcast, guys. I'm
No,
sorry.
hey, you want to take over? You're welcome to it. We'll let you have the reins. You can here's the log into the Discord and have fun.
Here, hang on. Let me adjust you to an admin.
But the game that I'm going to talk about is a game that I've had on my radar for a while now, and I've sort of been quietly reading it, quietly not talking about it, wanting to get it and wanting to get a good understanding of it before I really talked about it. And that's Red Markets. Red Markets is a game of economic horror. It is pretty much a zombie apocalypse game set during the collapse of the markets. It's like what would happen if the zombie outbreak happened during the what was that? The
Wall Street crash.
Yes, the Wall Street crash, but I was trying to think of a specific day, but it's fine. My brain's just not cooperating with me today. And I found this game and I was like, I think I get it. And then I picked it up. It's $20 for a watermarked PDF on Drive-Thru RPG. I picked it up and I was like, oh no, I get this. I understand what this is now. It is absolutely a ruthless, gritty game about economics, Wall Street, and zombies. Like, I don't know how else to put it. It is such a cool, weird game that I just sort of sat on it for a while because I was waiting. I'm like, we're going to do this horror month. I don't want to talk about this until horror month. And with this being the first episode of that, I was like, now's the time to talk about Red Markets. But that's my game of the week.
Cool. I've heard about Red Markets. I've heard it's very good. People have recommended it to me in the past. Never got
Yeah, I've heard some good things about it as well.
It seems really good. Like, from what I've read most of it, from what I've read, it seems really good. So what do you got, Liam? What's your first one?
Right, so I've already shilled Delta Green and Merkborg enough, so I won't include those. But in the spirit of Merkborg, if you want like a real over the top, grim dark sort of game that you find yourself laughing at constantly, I recently read for a review a game called Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland. Right?
Damn it. I was going to use that one.
Sorry. And so with Neon Lords, it's just so good. It's just hilarious. It's like a post-apocalyptic game that's sort of fantasy meets like post-apocalypse. But the whole premise is that like in the early 90s, the world went into like a world war, and then aliens turned up, and everything went tits up. And fast forward multiple generations, and we're now in like a apocalypse where they're looking back to society, and they've really embraced a lot of 80s elements. So we've got mullets, got heavy metal, we've got lots of neon, obviously, fanny packs. One of the gods is the Savage One, and when you read his description, it's very obvious. It's Randy Savage from WWE. And like, they've got there's so much stuff. It's just ridiculous. It's actually ridiculous. Mechanically speaking, it's built on the BX system, but they've added so much stuff to it. They've added so much flavor. It'll be very familiar to a lot of people who come from D&D, but they've added heaps of bits and pieces to it, like additional there's a stat called Sleaze, which works opposite attitude, which is like your normal charisma stat. Sleaze is like, how like it tracks you doing sleazy things, like not paying your retainers, getting mutations, bartering with people in the black market, etc. And if as your sleaze increases, people out in the wasteland treat you better, but people in society treat you worse. So you can't be good in both. You either have to be a sleazy person out in the wasteland, like a full-on wasteland warlord, or you have to be, like a respected member of society. And it's all about juggling those two. And like your hairstyle actually has an impact, by the way. I want to point out your hairstyle is a stat, and you can change your hairstyle, but there's a risk that they botch it and they give you a bad haircut or whatever. And the sort of character classes you play, there's like a brutal corn, which is a anthropomorphic unicorn. However, it's experienced like it's lost a limb in war. And traditionally, these unicorns, they call them brutal corns because they've got two. They're called bicorns, because they've got two horns. But these bicorns who are engaged in constant tribal warfare, if they take an injury, tradition has it that they have to be taken out back and shot, because that's what you do for horse, right? But these ones have decided to reject that and to take on like cybernetic, like, limbs and stuff. And because of that, they're outcast from society. So you can play him and be like a two-horned unicorn with a shotgun going around causing mayhem. Or you could be a cosmic barbarian which worships Lord Randy, the Savage One, and does lines of steroids that you keep in your in your neon fanny pack. It's ridiculous. Like, it is like, there is a android that's like a cross between the Terminator and Ronald Reagan. There's just so much stuff. It is ridiculous, and it is heavy metal AF. Like, it is so good.
You know what, this makes me mad because I have an actual play lined up, and we're about to record the first episode, and it's not this game. And I now immediately want it to be this game.
Yeah. Like, it's over the top. It's nuts. It is, and like very similar to Merkborg that way. It's definitely like, it's, for example, like, I'm just scrolling through the PDF now. In the magic section, it's got a picture of a person doing like the Hadouken from Street Fighter, right? Like, that's what magic looks like in the setting. It's not some widget with a staff. It's a guy throwing a power or whatever. It is nuts. It is awesome. I recommend it absolutely. It's very good.
Oh yeah, someone on Discord actually messaged me about that game earlier this week.
Yeah, it might be. I know the creator has been going around and getting people to look at it in return for reviews. That's how I found out about it. He's like, "Do you want to review my game?" I was like, "I'll have a look at it." And then I was like, "Oh my god!" And I will say this: I mentioned this in my review on the drive-through site, but like, my partner Julia, she pointed out that she's never heard me laugh out loud so much as when I was reading this book. Every page, I was just laughing. It's just so ridiculous. It's the 90s, early 90s, and the 80s turned up to 11. And just, it's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles meets Mad Max. It's nuts. It's nuts.
Oh yeah, it does. It looks like it's a game that intends to be played seriously, but doesn't take itself seriously. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it very much for me sits in the same camp as Merkborg, Shadow of the Demon Lord, those sorts of games that are like hilarious but grim at the same, like hilariously over the top, hyper violent grimness. That's just it's great. There's a character class called the Heather, right? Which it's called Heather, so young, so bad, so what? The Hellcat Eradication and Termination Heavy Enhanced Ranger, or Heather for short. And it's like this punk looking chick. They're like these enhanced sort of assassins, femme fatale types that you used to see a lot in the fiction from back then and stuff. It's just cool. It's cool stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah. All the tropes turned up to 11 and just dive into it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. So you stole the one I was going to use, so I'll have to go to another one. But that's actually, in all honesty, in just over a year of doing this, that's the first time that's actually happened. So, hey. So I'm going to go with a game. It's called Weird Frontiers RPG, and it's Cthulhu Wild West using Dungeon Crawl Classics rules.
I've heard of this one.
The art is amazing. Like, there's literally this squid-faced gunfighter thing that is just, it's too cool looking. But it's a Lovecraftian Weird West as opposed to, like the Wild West with weird stuff like Deadlands. This is, or at least, again, I'm just going based on what I see here on drive-through, but it looks like it's very much a Lovecraftian Wild West. It just looks like, again, if you're into that kind of thing, it looks like it could tick so many boxes. And if the art they're showing on the drive-through page is any indication, or even if it's all the art from inside the books, it's good. It's fun. But yeah, it just looks like a lot of fun. I may have to pick this up. I mean, the PDF is $30, so it's not a cheap PDF, but damn, it looks impressive.
The artwork does look excellent. It really does. Yeah.
It so fits the mood.
I've been playing Dungeon Crawl Classics recently. One of our fans offered to run it for me because he knew I hadn't played it, and it definitely would fit this style of game. Like, it creates some quite over the top sort of moments in a cool way. So I can see that working.
Oh yeah, scrolling through the preview, yeah, the artwork is all there's like a what looks like a Civil War battle scene, but if you look, there's like zombies and demon looking things. It's yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm looking at it too. It looks very good.
Yeah, I because it just feels like a setting that would be fun to play that in. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like I
mm.
know to kind of tangent a second, I know Down Darker Trails is either just out or going to be out any day now, I think, from
It's out.
Spivey. Is it? Okay. I've seen some stuff on Twitter, I just wasn't sure. But I thought about using that, but I haven't yet. So but this looks like maybe a little different take on that. I don't know exactly what he was going for with that, but yeah, so again, mine is called Weird Frontiers RPG, which brings us back around to you, Liam.
My next one is if you want something a bit more serious than the over the topness that is Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland. It's another game which I'm actually playing today. The creator's running a game for me, but I've been reading it and loving it. It's called Sigil and Shadow, and it's based on like a D100 light system. So it's like the similar system to what's used in Call of Cthulhu, but streamlined and lightened right down. And as for the setting, it's very much like modern contemporary setting where the occult and fantasy and all that sort of stuff sort of bleeds into our world a wee bit. So it's very much like a open sort of setting in that you could use it to play whatever modern occult sort of horror investigation stuff you want. So you probably could use it for like a rules like Delta Green if you want. You could run it for like your own version of Vampire the Masquerade or Cult Divinity Lost. You could do all those games, but in a streamlined rule set if you so wish. It's definitely got that sort of vibe to it. The game we're playing today, Matt's character is what they call an enlightened or an illuminated character. So it's a person who has learnt that the occult is out there and is trying to discover more about it. Whereas my character is what they call a shadowed character. So it's someone who the occult has actually influenced, like physically. So Matt's playing like a jock sort of character who's a car mechanic, and whilst hiking the mountains, found some strange cave and went missing for a month before he came back to reality. And he's been trying to figure out what that is. Whilst my character is currently the host of the consciousness of some strange lord from the 17th century or something, who occasionally takes control of his body. So he's like walking around with two consciences in his body and stuff like that. And we're going looking for a missing friend of ours. It's a cool sort of really streamlined sort of game that could play some sort of dark modern horror stuff quite well if you so wished. But it's definitely a bit more serious than the Merkborgs and Neon Lords of the Toxic Wastelands of the world. So I figured I'd offer people for a taste of either end of that spectrum. Yeah, it's quite cool.
Very cool. That does sound quite interesting.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, with all that being said, we do want to thank you for coming on the podcast. It has been an awesome conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, as always, links are in the show notes for anything, any of the games we talked about, and our Discord, anywhere Liam can be found will be found in the links in the description. We do want to thank everyone for listening, and remind you to get out there and play some RPGs and be kind to one another.
Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
My screen's turned off. That's weird. You can still hear me though?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oof. At the moment, I thought I had a power cut. I freaked out. Sorry, I waffle a wee bit.
No,
Oh.
we appreciate it.
Hey, look, we've joked about it, but seriously, podcasting is the most focused conversation Steve and I ever have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unreal how we'll start with a topic and then just in general conversation end up about 14 million different places